Hello everyone. Welcome to the introduction of the module on cultural industries. This lecture is part of your paper on media, culture and society. In this lecture, you will learn about the recent discussions and debates on cultural industries and the need to qualify and problematize it beyond the thesis proposed by Adorno and Horkheimer on culture industry. In this lecture, we'll take culture industry as a point of departure to understand the recent developments, as it does not provide a theoretical comfort to understand and explain the changes that have occurred and the way cultural industries have flourished today. In this lecture, we'll also engage with changes, transitions, and the importance of cultural industries. Through this lecture, you will learn a shift in our way of thinking about the recent vibrance in cultural industries. These industries may not be addressed from a narrowed perspective of treating culture as commodity. Instead, it has to be viewed as symbolic good. Now, while understanding this sector, it is important that it is a labor-intensive energy and more people are engaged in this sector. You learn below the types, characteristics, and the complexities lie in defining cultural industries. In spite of complexities, it is important to study this sector as it has a potential of creating labor opportunities and economy at large. Cultural industries. Now, when we talk about cultural industries, we find that the idea of cultural industries has gained a significant attention and subject to academic discussion ever since the publication of Adorno and Horkheimer's article on culture industry. The reasons for such engagement are manifold. However, one of the most significant reasons may be attributed to the nature of production of symbolic goods and texts within a capitalist society. Generally, one can refer cultural industries to those institutions in society that engage in producing and disseminating symbols in the form of cultural goods and services, but not as commodities. In the recent years, these industries are increasingly important as sources of wealth creation, are central to social and economic life. Cultural industries have become the agents of economic, social, and cultural change and providing a model for transformation in other industries. In fact, the idea of culture as a symbolic good has much more purchase than the idea of commodification in the contemporary times. While analyzing the reasons behind the idea of commodification of culture, one comes across Adorno and Horkheimer's critique of the process of industrialization of culture by referring to the process of standardization and commodification as it represented the era of assembly-like production initiated by forest economy, which resulted in standardized product. Similarly, the propounder of culture industry thesis subscribed to standardized cultural products that resulted in duplication in the process of mass production. The public is catered for with a hierarchical range of mass-produced products of varying quality, thus advancing the rule of complete quantification. Everybody must behave as if spontaneously in accordance with his previously determined and indexed level and choose the category of mass product turned out for his type. Adorno and Horkheimer viewed the culture industry as an ideological conduit of capitalism that transmitted the value of consumerism with an intent to reproduce capitalism ideologically so that viewers become passive consumers, thereby discouraging collective action and undermining radical thinking in society. Hence, culture industry was viewed as an extension of the state and the ruling class for controlling and dominating masses. The initial conception of culture industry had a strong Marxian lineage without exploring alternative conceptions or positive contributions of culture. Scholars opine that in spite of Adorno's vision of culture industry as a cultural collapse, culture industry flourished and provided enormous opportunities all over the world. Hence the need to revisit culture industry thesis and looking beyond to understand the recent developments. Scholars opine that the idea of culture industry was economically deterministic and elitist, and examine cultural industries as sites not just of economic and ideological determination, but of contestation, complexity, and struggle. Further questions emerged about the value differentiation that was implied in Adorno's work between high art and low culture. It also raised questions about interests that high culture served. However, the idea of low culture was treated as debased form of culture rather than being recognized as a space for resistance and play. Besides, specific and differentiated features of the cultural industries were explored, such as the text produced through cultural industries. The idea of text was no more viewed as antithetical to capital's interest. Instead, methods were employed to understand text as profit-generating commodities within the ambit of risks and competition. Strategies used by cultural industries were examined, such as to ensure profit. These include the factors such as maximizing the repertoire to produce product differentiation and the state of uncertainty principle, the creation of artificial scarcity through strategies such as retaining copyright on the cultural product and vertical integration, allowing the company to control the release of cultural products, and through corporate strategies such as concentration, internationalization, and cross-sector ownership. Such political economic analysis enabled scholars to take a more sophisticated approach to cultural industries. Thus, the manifold issues discussed under the rubric of cultural industries shows a reaction against the culture industry and its shortcomings. As O'Connor rightly points out, it involved a conceptual shift that by the early 1980s had given rise to a much more sophisticated and empirically based understanding of the complex structure and variable dynamics at work in the cultural industries. The use of the plural term industries is significant because this school of thought rejected the use of the singular term, which implied a unified field where all the different forms of cultural production which coexist in modern life are assumed to obey the same logic. As Piaget also rejected Adorno and Horkheimer's nostalgic attachment to pre-industrial forms of cultural production. Piaget highlighted that not only cultural production had brought about a greater commodification of cultural goods, it also offered the possibilities for culture to develop in new innovative directions. The commodification of culture was also seen by these writers as incomplete, as contested, rather than always already complete process suggested by Adorno and Horkheimer. The cultural industries approach seeks to research the experiential terrain of labor for cultural producers and examines the distinctive features of cultural commodities. This approach is more successful because it acknowledges the complex, contested nature of the cultural industries, one that allows for both structure and agency. As Ghanem argues, the cultural market cannot be read as a destruction of high culture by vulgar commercialism or as a suppression of authentic working class culture, but should be read as a complex hegemonic dialectic of liberation and control. Now, we need to discuss about the types of cultural industries. As we earlier discussed about cultural industries that provides a distinctive way of engaging with the industrial practices that are different from conventional industries. However, there are different types of industries that may be grouped under the umbrella of cultural industries. Like David Hesmont's broad classification may be of help to understand the complexity in cultural industries, as David classifies as core cultural industries and the peripheral ones. He conceptualizes core cultural industries as those which are primarily concerned with the industrial production and dissemination of texts, advertising and marketing industry. Its concern is to sell products of other industries, broadcasting industry, radio and television industries, analog, digital and satellite comes under it. Then film industries, that is the production and distribution of films on formats like video, DVD, online television, then television, etc. Then we have an internet industry, the websites, online portals, their creation and distribution over the hardware architecture of internet. Music industry, the recording of sounds, music, songs, publishing, distribution and ownership of music, publishing industry, both print and electronics, then books, CDs, DVDs, magazines, newspapers, online database, websites and many more. Then also video games, computer-based games, online-based games, even role-play games, etc. The peripheral ones are not separated on the parameters of creativity. The peripheral differs from the core in the way they are being produced. The peripheral ones reproduce text using semi-industrial or non-industrial methods. Also, we can talk about theatre has only embarked on production and reproduction of text and symbols in the last few decades in industrial mode. Art, on the other hand, attracts a lot of money and interest, but the paintings, installations, sculptures do not have the reproduction stage. The art industry does so, but to add value to those reproduction, it has to undertake a laborious process which limits the number of them being produced. Apart from this core and the peripheral ones, there are some of them who cannot be put in the category of cultural industries. However, they do share some features which characterizes the cultural industries. As Hesmont outlines some of these borderline cases that we refer to the sports, that the basis of sports is competitiveness, that is football and cricket, especially in India, but also shows which put up shows and performances which has entertainment value. Audience witness them to consume those performances and get entertained. Live performance in sports are not based on creation of text. However, the entertainment aspects of the sports, whether it's cricket, football, lawn tennis, makes it to be considered in the borderline case of cultural industries. Then also you talk about cultural industry hardware. Television and other electronic goods distributing cultural text provides us a curious case. Let us take the case of television. The television sets are produced to disseminate text and symbols. Cultural texts are produced to be consumed and experienced by this machine. The goods such as TV, HDTV, MP3 players rely heavily on design inputs but are not centered around symbol creators. At the same time, the developments and the change of the consumer electronics through which cultural text is produced and circulated is to be tracked and mapped. The technology of dissemination influences the way that texts are produced and reproduced. Software. Now, software is another sector where in software industries we have features which are very similar to that of cultural industries. There is creativity involved, but software is not text. The computerized task is the core function, not meaning making. Similarly, in fashion industry is an interesting case. It is a hybrid of cultural industry and consumer goods industry. The degree of functionality and signification that we had talked about is nearly balanced in fashion industry. By that we can say that it makes the fashion industry a highly complex case to be placed in any category. All these classifications does give us an indication of the ambivalence that is associated with cultural industries. So for the purpose of having a clear understanding about the nature and workings of cultural industries, scholars are more concerned with and limit themselves primarily to the core cultural industries. David Thorsby outlines 4 aspects of the cultural industries that can be used to differentiate from other industries in the economy. These are broadly the nature of output produced, type of firm, behavior of firms, and nature of employment. Now, while discussing about output, Thorsby highlights that cultural industries are engaged in producing both private and public goods. Private goods may be referred to the purchase of artwork, admissions to music theatre, and performances in consumption of television, program, newspapers, and so on. These private goods are organized by the conventional markets that take care of goods and services. Besides, the cultural industry's output may also be referred to as public goods that are related to musical compositions and literary productions. Once these are published and performed, they may be traded through various private agencies as private good through various formats, be it book, compact disc, and other forms with due enforcement of intellectual property for exchange and market. Besides distinction between public and private goods, there are also mixed goods that may refer to both public and private goods. The mixed goods refer to the benefits of community, which may refer to civilizing functions for the benefit of local and national identity. It also refers and emphasizes on cultural diversity. Here, government intervention is crucial in order to afford the idea of diversity at the cost of market interest. Hence, the idea of cultural production sector is complex, which involves not only non-market attributes but also for a larger interest of policy formation and implementation. Industry structure. Now, while discussing about the structure of industry, formations in cultural industries are highly mixed of industries, ranging from commercial firms, education and health sectors to not-for-profit sectors. It reflects the presence of both public and private sector operations. One can broadly classify varieties of cultural sector business under 4 rubrics as outlined by David Thorsby. Small to medium enterprises, that is SMEs. The SMEs has a wide range starting from individual artist as a trader to the handle operations related to artwork and handling the craft of selling related activities directly to the consumers or as intermediaries of other firms by providing goods and services. There are also collectives of such individuals and forming cooperatives for providing services, consultancies, publishing and various literary agents commissioning literary works. Not-for-profit organization, that is NPOs. In this section we may include various cultural organizations engaged in organizing cultural festivals, functions and activities. In the recent years, there is a mushrooming of such organizations that include dance and drama companies, music, circus, performing arts. Besides, one may include various union organizations, and other institutions with similar interest. Now, while discussing about public cultural institutions, we say that besides individual initiative, there are also initiatives by the government by creating public institutions or publicly financed institutions to promote activities of government at different levels, such as at regional, national, and international level to promote culture. For instance, museum, art galleries, heritage, and finally public service broadcasting may fall under this category. Large commercial corporations. Most of the large commercial corporations may be referred to companies that operate both within nation and transcend national borders in terms of size and scope. The employees in such organizations vary as the jurisdictions vary across countries. We can list some of these organizations such as media organizations, publishing industries, record and music industries, various production and distribution of audiovisual products. The size and shape of such organizations are transnational in character. While taking a closer look at the size and shape of these organizations, it reflects that there is a variation from small to large firms. The employees vary from national to transnational sites. This is of particular interest to policymakers to map the industry and growth potential in the cultural industries. While discussing about behavior of firms, we find that besides cultural value, cultural industries have an economic value as well. It is important to know the objectives and incentives that these firms offer and the conditions in which these industries operate. Such industries have both economic and cultural values. The goal of such firms could be to gain profitability along with cultural and artistic excellence in the field of culture. In spite of desired goals and profit, it is extremely difficult to draw any kind of generalizations on the cultural industries. The variations within cultural industries in terms of shape and size, workforce, and nature of output do not provide a coherent picture. In certain cases, where the size is small, the idea of cultural value dominates. On the contrary, where the organizations are big, the idea of profit or economic value matters. As regard the nature of employment in cultural industries, the idea of creative workforce is a very recent origin. Even most of the countries are yet to recognize the creative workforce. Although workers have been engaged in creative activities, but been never recognized as a part of creativity. It is difficult to categorize and classify among the nature of creativity and work. As Florida makes a list of classification of creative work, which becomes large, that it becomes problematic to identify and prioritize work as creative work. One of the hurdles lies in how we distinguish between creative and non-creative work in cultural industries. For example, not all activities in the cultural industries are not creative work. In film industry, actors, directors, playwrights, directors and designers are engaged in creative activities. Rest workers such as stageheads, ticket sellers, managers, ushers may not be engaged in creative activities. Similarly, one can identify so many employees engaged in television production, theatre production, newspaper, and finally publishing industries. The distinctions of creative and non-creative work is very, very glaring. Before we problematize such industries as cultural industries, one needs to map how many people are engaged in creative and non-creative work in a particular cultural industry. Besides the nature of organizations, such as what happens when a small organization in creative work becomes bigger in size and scope, does it equally expand in terms of creative work within the organization? As David Thorsby outlines, that the scope of creative work decreases along with the expansion of industry and organization. In spite of such complexities, mapping of creative work and worker is important from the policy point of view. This sector is becoming a vibrant sector with a lot of job opportunities, as the sector is purely based on labor-intensive energy, hence creates the potential for job opportunities. As Hicks highlights, that there are more people dependent on this sector as they feed to this sector being trained elsewhere and emerging as entrepreneurs but feeding to this sector. It provides ample opportunities for the concerned government agencies to tap these resources so as to explore and expand labour markets in cultural sector, which in return could contribute to the state exchequer at large. While concluding, we can briefly summarize by saying that in this lecture we discussed the importance, complexity of cultural industries. Besides, effort has been made to understand the nature of organizations engaged in cultural industries. Finally, we discussed the complexity of creative and non-creative work in cultural sector, the importance of cultural value as well as economic value that reside in cultural industries. Finally, we have discussed the need to strengthen this sector that helps in engaging work and job opportunities from a labor point of view, as this sector creates opportunities for labor-intensive energy and contributes to the economy at large. For more details, please read the e-text of this lecture properly and attempt the questions in the end. Thank you.